Poltergeist activity is mostly a living person thing. There are some very rare exceptions where it might be something else, but almost all of the time, it's people creating this, people who are alive, as opposed to this disembodied spirit.
Oh, you're talking like telekinesis. And is it called telekinesis or us creating?
Psychokinesis. Okay. Psychokinesis is the scientific term, but yes. The truth is, psychic ability scares some people at a level that you can't deal with. It's the fear becomes so primal that they lose all rationality around it. You know, these are the people that will burn witches at the stake and utterly lose their minds over a parapsychology experiment that was successful. It's tapping something deep and primal within them, and they're not able to see it clearly at that point. One of the things that I find fascinating about parapsychology is it demonstrates that the world that we see, the world that we're creating around us, is shaped by our thinking.
Welcome back, guys, to the Kotodama Podcast. Over here, we explore the mystical. And my guest today is Craig Weiler, and he is a parapsychology journalist. And I am so excited to have you here with me today, Craig. Thank you so much for joining.
Jenna, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on your podcast.
So I'm really excited. I am an absolute spiritual being. Okay, I know I have a human experience. I've had many experiences like that. For you, before we even start, for anybody who doesn't know, what even is parapsychology?
Yeah, parapsychology is the science of psychic ability. And what that means is that you have a scientific organization, that's the Parapsychological Association. They are affiliated with the American Association for the Advancement of Science. That's an umbrella science organization. They got vetted back in 1969 that they were a real scientific organization. So like other science organizations and like scientists around the world, everybody who does science, everybody does stuff in basically the same way. You have experiments that have to follow certain protocols, and those experiments are published in scientific journals. And then these various organizations will have conferences where they collect the experiments that have been done, and they present a conference, and then these people speak at the conferences, and they take questions and that sort of thing. And all of this information is all collected, and the organizations basically maintain a database of the sciences that have been done. And everybody who does new experiments has to reference old experiments so that everybody's keeping track of everything that's been done when they're doing new things. And there's like this whole system of science that takes place. And this is every science that we could possibly talk about. They all do it the same way. And in parapsychology, of course, testing for psychic ability, anybody who's spiritual knows that psychic ability is kind of strange, right? It goes in, it goes out. Sometimes you're just totally with it. And other times it's like it's completely gone. So experimenters experience the same things with psychic ability. It is difficult to test. And so what they do is they use statistics. So a typical scientific experiment will be compared to chance results. Whenever you see somebody comparing something to chance results, that's statistical, because it's how likely was this to occur. So, for example, if somebody's testing telepathy, they'll typically, in a lot of experiments, have choose one out of the four, right? And that's called a forced choice experiment. And if you do enough of those and you beat chance, then you can say that something is happening. So parapsychology is like all that kind of stuff, very technical, very scientific, building on previous knowledge, and all done by scientists. These people, everybody's got a PhD. Everybody. This is just how that's done. And that's basically it. That's parapsychology.
Yeah, so you're basically saying it is a real science. And, I'm lately in my own life, for background information, dismantling the programming that we went through especially in the Western world, of making us forget that we are spiritual beings having a human experience rather than, this meat blobs that are walking around like machines without any consciousness outside of the body. So for me personally, I have actually watched your podcast episode on the Mind the Shift podcast, where you talk about, for example, Wikipedia and how Wikipedia is actually, I think you called it a materialist bastion. And
yeah, that would be accurate.
yeah, so that's exactly what I feel all the time when I look things up, for example, right? And I go on to, obviously, immediately Wikipedia pops up when you Google something. And every time, it's just, for me, it's propaganda, and it's almost like a cult. The reason I'm saying this is because it seems incredibly dogmatic to me. So you know much more about all of this, about materialism and parapsychology, and I guess the whole scientific, field, or the people who are in that field and the way that they're thinking. So can you, because I can already feel you kind of protecting the parapsychology, I guess, what do you say, the parapsychology science. And can you tell me why you feel the need to do that?
Oh, sure. So with parapsychology, you constantly have a lot of people who don't believe that psychic ability exists. And that, in fact, is kind of the mainstream science view of parapsychology, that psychic ability can't possibly exist. Amazingly, physicists would say, "You sure about that? Because this psychic ability thing kind of meshes with, science just fine. This isn't such a problem." But in psychology, they've gone very much, oh, this stuff is all brain functions and whatnot, because that's easier for people to wrap their head around. And then you'll also have a lot of scientists who are religious people, like a lot of the world. Scientists also experience spiritual things. It's just when you start writing up papers and all this sort of things, you kind of have to conform to the system in order to get published, and in order to further your career. Everything's kind of got to be tailored according to how they want to see it. And so this means following some of the dogma and the materialist mindset. So I'm part of the Frontier Journalists Network as well, which is part of the Galileo Commission, who are working on promoting a consciousness first view of reality. Now, you can go down a philosophy rabbit hole here and keep going for a very long time, but I'll be really brief. Think of the world. There are two different ways to view the universe. One is materialist. That is, that the universe is like a giant clock, and that you need to know how all the pieces move and all this sort of thing. And once you do understand how all this stuff moves together, you understand the universe better. So that's a materialist view of the universe. It's like a giant clock. The other view of the universe, the competing version, is that the universe is like a giant thought. So instead of being based on things like gears and things meshing and gravity and all these things moving, it's a thought. It's something non-material. And this is the basis for all of the material reality, that thought is creating it. And it's a lot more malleable than a material universe. And things are a lot more bendy, I guess is a word to use here. So consciousness would be fundamental to reality, which means that consciousness creates the material reality that we experience. And there are really good reasons for believing this. But it's harder to wrap your head around. It's difficult for scientists because you get into things like problems with causality. and also things just don't work quite the same if you don't have a materialist mindset, and some people have trouble with that. Harder to wrap your head around.
Yeah. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
So you're more likely to see people who have a slightly creative bent moving towards the consciousness side, and people who have a more analytical bent moving the other way. Well, science is loaded with analytical types, and so you're going to see that mindset competing a lot with people who have a kind of a more of an artistic mindset. And that's kind of what we see out there. And there's this whole clash going on. This is a very large disagreement within the sciences.
Yeah, and I feel just intuitively when I listen to some of these scientists, or when, remembering my own time when I was in the academic field. I was never a scientist, but, I studied at, in university. So I would obviously be surrounded by these academic types. And what I pick up on often is a fear, almost like as if they are scared of if there could be more and what that would mean. I often, found it funny in my own life with the people that I talked about this, that a lot of, let's say, the atheist viewpoint on life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Often I heard atheists say that, for example, spiritual people are just believing in that because it soothes them, because they don't want to. I think the way that the people that I talked to, they said, spiritual people don't want to confront that after death there is no existence. And I was like, dude, non-existence is so much easier than whatever the hell I'm experiencing when I get out of my body and see what reality is from a different perspective. Because do you think how overwhelming it is when you first realize that, for example, time isn't linear, and if time is an illusion, that means space is an illusion, and all of these concepts, out of body work that I did, or, all of these spiritual things, for example, the psychic abilities as well. All of that stuff is actually much more overwhelming and difficult, I feel like, to deal with. That, for example, non-linearity of time, and that existence doesn't have a beginning or an end, in my opinion and in my experience, that is much more scary, I think, to the human mind than non-existence after death. So I have never understood that specific viewpoint. But when you work with these people, or, meet these people or talk to these people that are extremely materialist and very maybe atheistic or very analytical and just work kind of from the, brain side of things, what do you think is the biggest fear there, and how do you counter that, or can you help people maybe who are in a very analytical mindset to kind of, is there a question that you ask them that kind of opens them up for the possibility of there being more?
Man, if I ever found that question, I would hold on to it for dear life. My experience is that there are two kinds of skeptics. One is the people who are actually open, and they'll listen, and they're interested in taking in information, and they're not very judgmental. And then there's the other type, which are really dogmatic. We call them pseudo-skeptics, and they're really just there to push a certain point of view, and they really don't care what you say. And the more science and the more facts you bring in, the more agitated and insulting and angry they become. And I've dealt with hundreds of these people over the years. I can tell within like a minute or so of engaging with them whether how this is going to play out. It's that easy. And typically, one of the ways to tell whether you're dealing with one of these pseudo skeptics, also called scoffers, cynics. I mean, there are lots of words for this type of person, but basically, we're talking about somebody who, first of all, never does any research on the topic that they have such strong opinions about. I mean, they almost never know anything about it. But they have strong opinions. They'll tell you. And then when you start giving them information, they start spinning it according to their own narrative. And because they don't give you any, what's the word for it? They don't grant you your own expertise. They don't trust anything you say. So you have no credibility with them. So you have zero credibility with them, and all of their sources have 100% credibility, and there's no getting past that. They simply refuse to believe anything that isn't within their own mindset. So it's not, for most people, most of the time, it's not worth engaging with them. The only people I would say that really have a good reason to engage with them are studying them.
But what I don't understand is, even if we look at physics, right? Of course, that you have more in I guess traditional physics. You have more of this causality, and more of this I guess the material world and all that stuff that it focuses on. But then when you look at quantum physics, everything goes out the window, and that is like proven, and that is a science. And I don't understand how people in a skeptic mindset do not think about quantum physics and the very mystical nature of our reality that quantum physics proves to be real. And so, because it goes against everything that actually traditional physics was claiming before. So when you said that the materialist view is almost like this, like big clock, and that it moves like that you have to look outside of yourself, basically outside, and analyze and understand the world around you to understand the world. But actually, quantum physics, even when we just look at quantum entanglement or, particles being, or in a like superposition, for example, all of these super interesting, the double slit experiment, I mean, mind-blowing when I first found that out like 10 years ago. And I was like, what? This is so interesting. Like, why is nobody talking about this? And so how do these skeptical people think about that, do you think, about quantum physics?
Well, all of this stuff can be interpreted in different ways. And so what they will do is they will take a materialist interpretation of these things, and they will insist that that's the true one. Yeah, I've seen that over and over and over again. And so they're just utterly convinced that their materialist version is the version. And so, there's no expanding them beyond that, because the expanded part is too hard to wrap your head around. When you're dealing with a universe where space and time are, for lack of a better word, illusions, that is really hard to wrap your head around, because what happens is that meaning is then the important thing. And meaning itself, you start, you're having to keep backing up and backing up here to get to that part. And what you end up dealing with is what's going on inside of your mind is creating your experience of reality. The experience of reality is our reality.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's the hard part for them. And you could tell them this 6 ways from Sunday, and they're not going to hear it, because it doesn't. They really can't. Either they don't have the type of intelligence necessary for thinking in that matter, or they're so locked into their particular viewpoint that they're simply not going to hear it, because they can't possibly be wrong.
Yeah, and I want to move on soon from this, focusing on the skeptics, but I just find it interesting that, from a philosophical perspective, because I'm very, very philosophical since I'm a little child. I remember when I was 8 years old, I was like, why is existence, and why don't we just not exist? And does that actually mean the same thing? Like, I had these really big thoughts already, like these philosophical and even spiritual experiences since I was a child. So for me, obviously, I have a very, very different mindset. But, I try to understand people, right? And I try to really look at these people as well and be like, okay, everybody's on a path, and everybody, has different experiences in their lives. But something that just logically doesn't make sense to me as a very philosophical person is, if you think you can just measure things outside of yourself and that is all that reality is, you have to believe in an objective reality. But this is where my problem comes in. I don't actually believe in objective reality. And I tell you why. It's because the thing that you just said is your own experience. You are at the center of your universe, okay?
Mm-hmm.
You are your body, I don't know, your being is the thing that your experience comes through, basically, or is filtered through, or however you want to look at this. But how could you ever believe in objective reality outside of you when we don't even know, first of all, what consciousness is? Second of all, I mean, no, I think people know from a heart perspective, and I've experienced that, but from a science perspective, people cannot really say, okay, what even is consciousness? So, you know what I mean? I'm basically saying,
I do.
I'm trying to say that your experience is you. It is subjective. So even when you do these scientific experiments, it filters through your own experience, which means it could all be an illusion anyways. It could all be just, when we look at solipsism and all these other philosophical, whatever, you could go into these, philosophical, I guess, dark, holes into this, right? Into these, rabbit holes. But how can they just believe in an objective reality at all? It kind of doesn't make sense to me.
So I understand where you're coming from. And your problem is that you are a very, very strong holistic thinker. So you get the big picture. The big picture is very, very clear for you. It is for me too. This is why I can relate to this quite well. So you have this really strong holistic ability where you can always take a step back and look at things from the larger picture. Apparently, other people can't do that. That this skill, I'm not going to say it's like totally unique, but there's a much smaller population of people who can manage this type of thinking. It is not the norm. And so this will make you run around going, everybody looks nuts. They're crazy. Why are they doing it this way? And that's because you have the holistic thinking to constantly take a step back and go, oh, what the heck? No, this doesn't make sense from a holistic point of view. And it's really obvious sometimes. So this is the problem that you have there. And I've run into this, talking to scientists and realizing, oh, wow, in the holistic department, nobody's home. So they're dealing with stuff right in front of them, and that's all that they can acknowledge. And if you try to take a step back, they can't go there with you. And even scientists struggle with this sometimes. Heck, you can run into this problem in your own frickin' family. It's just one of those things.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking too deep into anything, actually. Maybe people don't think that deep. And I see why it is scary, because I have faced my own fears since for many years. And it is one of the scariest things to actually let go of the need to know it all, to let go of, basically to understand that you know nothing. But at the same time, your experience is actually all you know, and everything is valid. Just because it is in your head doesn't mean it's not real, Harry, Dumbledore and Harry Potter.
Yeah.
It is that, and at the same time, you know nothing. And so it is that very being comfortable in the unknown is super scary. And I think a lot of skeptics actually have that deep fear, whether they acknowledge that or not. And I fully understand and empathize, actually, because I've been through that too. But, to move on to a more holistic, spiritual, parapsychological conversation, I want to ask you personally, Craig, have you, by being a journalist, and you talk about parapsychology, can you talk about one of the most interesting things that, parapsychological things that you have found out that were just really maybe changed your view of the world, or surprised you, or were just beautiful and interesting and wondrous and magical?
Well, there have been a few things. Every now and then something just boggles my mind. So one of them was the telepathy tapes. I don't know if you've heard about that, but I've had email conversations with Kai Dickens, the lead researcher, and this sort of thing, and the idea that you have this nonverbal population that has their own like telepathic network. So they're communicating with each other telepathically on something they call it the hill, where they go and just connect with one another and share. And of course, you're dealing with an area outside of time and space where the world's knowledge is just available to you, all this different stuff. So they're having what would be for us really wild experiences. Yeah, and it kind of takes my breath away sometimes that we've got this population among us. And of course, they're nonverbal. They have to type their answers to stuff when they can do that at all. So we don't really have access to what's going on with them most of the time because they can't verbalize it.
Why though? Why can they not verbalize it? Sorry, I don't understand.
They're autistic. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. So highly autistic individuals.
Highly autistic, nonverbal,
Okay.
highly autistic individuals. So they're smart and it's not locked in, but they don't have good body control. They don't. They have trouble forming the words and all this sort of thing. The parts of their brain that do language and verbalize it don't work well. So typing is one of the ways that they can get around that. But even typing is challenging for them, so they can't do it very quickly. And so the telepathy tapes is a good documentary for that. That they're talking about all this spiritual stuff that's going on that they're aware of. It's real. It's ordinary for them, and they gain knowledge through this process. They literally learn all about topics telepathically. So they'll come in with a lot more information than people think they have about a variety of things without having access to normal media that we do. So that's really fascinating.
That's beautiful because that kind of connects to how space is an illusion. When I talk about space and time being an illusion, I don't mean that it's not real. I mean that it is not what we think it is, that it is different than it appears to be. And I had many, many telepathic experiences my whole life, actually almost every day, specifically with people that I'm very, very connected to, where I just kind of know. I have all of a sudden a thought drops into my head that has nothing to do with anything that I thought about before. When we think about the brain and thoughts, by the way, thoughts can be measured outside of your body, I believe. So even that is super fascinating. I don't know if you've heard about that, but I think thoughts are more like a sense. It's not necessarily all yours and it's not necessarily all in your brain, but I think we sense thoughts from my own experience. And what I feel often with my partner, for example, is that we will talk about something or we will just sit there and all of a sudden something drops into my consciousness that I have has nothing to do with anything that I thought about before. And then literally 2 seconds later, he will talk about that thing. And I'm just like, that's literally what I just thought about. That's literally what what just was coming through. So I have many, many of these experiences telepathically, and I find them I think it's super fascinating, but at the same time, yeah, I'm like, yeah, of course, because space is an illusion. Like everything's here and now. So
Yeah.
of course, right? But yeah, and what is when I think about parapsychology, because I'm not too read on this science, but I kind of thought about more so paranormal investigations, like ghosts and all of these paranormal stuff, like ETs. Is that part of the parapsychology studies, or is that a different field?
It is part of parapsychology, and there are a few researchers who focus on paranormal stuff. So the paranormal is you could be dealing with hauntings, apparitions, ghosts, and that sort of thing. And then there's a lot of focus on poltergeist type events, because these and part of the reason that the poltergeist events have so much focus on them, first of all, is it does cause a great deal of distress for the people involved. And because it's when these things happen, they're very unusual. They tend to break people's ideas of reality because you have stuff flying around and all that kind of thing. Or weird stuff that can't possibly happen pops up and all that. Just this stuff is really, really distressing. And there's actually therapy that's available for people who have these experiences. And one of the first things that they do is you have to let them know, hey, this is really rare, but it does happen. And, I've talked to a couple of people who've gone through the experience, and, before they share it with anybody else, they share it with somebody like me, because nobody else is safe at first, because they don't want to be seen as crazy. So somebody has to come in and help them ground this in some science. It's like, hey, there have been reports of this dating back to the Roman times. These are exceedingly rare, but everybody remembers them and they get documented a lot. And then you have some researchers that have come through and actually, verified that, yes, these things were happening. And there are some very famous cases throughout history of poltergeist stuff. And when researchers go in and they start talking to people, they can generally identify what they call as an agent, which is poltergeist activity is mostly a living person thing. There are some very rare exceptions where it might be something else, but almost all of the time it's people creating this, people who are alive, as opposed to this disembodied spirit.
Are you saying, okay, what do you mean they are creating this? Because I have had some interesting experiences myself. So, and I have wondered this before because I also believe in quantum, I do quantum shift consciously all the time. And I have even, I want to say objects materialize where it wasn't before. So sometimes I'm wondering, because I had like I would say a poltergeist experience when I was a child. And I'm wondering now if that was us creating it, more so like, the human consciousness and awareness and focus collapsing time and space and manifesting things into the physical, or if it was something outside of us, which doesn't really exist, but okay, like a ghost. So is that what you mean? Or do you mean people are just scared and they are imagining these things?
Okay, so the way to bet, no, they're not imagining. They've actually, so what you experienced when something appeared, that's called an apport. APPORT, apport. Yeah. And so they have a name for that. And so what they're saying is that these experiences are created by the people involved. In other words, you would be the person generating this experience. So okay, let me give you an example. Just general, I don't know the specifics of this particular one, but you have a girl, she's hitting that period of around 13 where the hormones are changing, and she's in an abusive family. She's got all kinds of subconscious stuff going wild, and the conditions get just right, and suddenly you have all this poltergeist stuff going all over the place as some internal part of her is acting out by throwing stuff around psychically.
Oh, you're talking like telekinesis, and is it called telekinesis or us creating?
Psychokinesis. Okay. Psychokinesis is the scientific term, but yes.
My goodness, that is so interesting. It's funny that you mentioned this because psychokinesis, I just stumbled upon some videos on social media, and I absolutely, of course, I believe it. And it's just so interesting what the human can do, what we can do if we know our powers and how to harness them. So do you have some, I guess, examples there on psychokinetic scientific studies or, experiments?
Most of the experiments on psychokinesis have to do with what they call micro and stuff. So what they will do is they will get a true random event generator. This is something that uses just a tiny bit of radioactivity to create random signals. And then they will have people try to affect this with their mind. And this is the way you do a lab experiment with psychokinesis, is you'll have somebody try to change the outcome of a radioactive, of a little radioactive detector to see whether it stops being truly random and starts ordering. So when they do this experiment, the results are very small. So we're talking about like 51% when true randomness is 50.5%. I mean, really, we're talking about a very, very small number, but you do enough experiments and the results become, the results slowly build more and more validity. So you do 1 million experiments like this, and you end up with an almost absolute certainty that this experiment is demonstrating psychokinesis, but the effect is very, very tiny.
Yeah. And the ones that I have seen is people moving objects without touching it, but very not super heavy objects. Let me frame it that way. So I think I do believe, though, deeply that everything is possible, and I think that we can unlock these abilities within ourselves. But I wanted to touch on the thing that you mentioned, that people with paranormal experiences kind of feel safe with you because they can feel you're not judging them, and also from obviously your background of what you do for a living. So I think that's really interesting, because I actually feel that part of the brainwashing to kind of make people fear these things because people fear of being judged as crazy is extremely harmful to the psyche and to the human. And I just want to know what you think about this, the way that basically society labels these things as crazy.
Well, if it wasn't scientists, it was religious leaders, right? This stuff, people have been labeling this stuff as crazy stuff for eons. And the truth is, psychic ability scares some people at a level that you can't deal with. In other words, it's the fear becomes so primal that they just lose all ability, lose all rationality around it. And that is, these are the people that will burn people, burn witches at the stake, and utterly lose their minds over a parapsychology experiment that was successful. It's tapping something deep and primal within them, and they're not able to see it clearly at that point.
Yeah, and I find it super heartbreaking. And I often look at these things, like even mental illnesses, such as, for example, schizophrenia, as something that is both. Yes, it is an chemical imbalance in the mind, in the brain, because obviously everything spiritual manifests in the physical, and everything has, it is both at the same time. It is, yes, I think they are perceiving things that are there, that are very low entity, low vibrational frequency beings. And at the same time, I think them experiencing that, for example, very frightening things, is also true, and it is happening, and it is real for them, very real. And I think it is real objectively, whatever that means, but just that we do not tune into that with our frequency because we're in a different frequency and we are in a different vibration. And so I kind of look at it always from both sides, and I don't think that one negates the other. But I think there have been some studies, don't quote me on this, but apparently that people who experience, for example, schizophrenia, in the Western world have many, I want to say, much more scary experiences than people in other cultures where it is less dogmatic and less, where they have, for example, in the Western world, apparently a lot of people have these very scary experiences where they feel like, the FBI or something is watching them, those types of experiences. And so they kind of proved that, these schizophrenic experiences are absolutely tied to the culture and your surroundings. And so, this to me is also heartbreaking because I'm like, oh my God, we could actually deal with this in a much less painful way if we stopped judging it so much and operating so much from the mind and more so from the heart, even when we think about empathy and compassion for these individuals.
That's a tough one. One of the things that parapsychology shows is that in order for this to work, you need theories that involve everybody being deeply connected. So the psychic ability comes on a deep subconscious level where we're all basically within the same conscious space together. There's no real separation, which means that, like, for somebody with schizophrenia, it might be something where they simply can't turn it off. It's simply too loud for them, and they have lost their own sense of self in there. They can't quiet this this noise down enough, and so because they're not particularly strong individuals, they're picking up all the anger and fear of everybody and replaying it.
Yeah.
Because you need a certain amount of strength to tune all that stuff out and to make decisions. And one of the things that I find fascinating about parapsychology is it demonstrates that, to a certain extent, the world that we see, the world that we're creating around us, is shaped by our thinking. And so we are literally going to, and not just, when I say shaped, I mean literally creating things in our lives. So, for example, there was an experiment, and I love this one because it's just a simple telepathy experiment. But what they did with it was the researcher made a no and a yes answer equal. So the weight for a wrong answer was the same as for a correct answer. And then what he did was he ran a survey first to find out whether people were skeptical or whether they were believers in psychic ability, and then did a test of all of them together. So it's an unselected population of people, some of them skeptics, some of them regular. So if you look at psychic ability, just how did the entire group working together, how much psychic ability did they show? It's a flat line, right? So no psychic ability showed up that way at all. When you divided these groups up into believers and skeptics, you got, and let's say that the believers first and the skeptics second, you got a line that looked like this: believers, skeptics. So you got an S. That's a really unusual shape to get in a psychological experiment. You don't normally get S's. So what's happening is that the skeptics are getting wrong answers above chance, and the believers are getting correct answers above chance. So the skeptics are deliberately blowing it somewhere at a subconscious level. So they're creating the result that they wanted.
Yeah,
they didn't want to believe in it, so they got wrong answers. And they did this above chance.
Yeah. This is the big thing about creating. I know that you create your own reality, right? So for me, this is not like shocking, but at the same time, it's so funny because it will literally, that fact that your thoughts create reality actually will prove you as a skeptic right all the time. Like this is the loop that we keep ourselves in. So this experiment is so interesting, right? And the more you open up and you focus on these synchronicities, you focus on these psychic abilities, all of a sudden you get them much more and you tune into them more, and then obviously you prove it more to yourself. But it's funny how that works, right?
It is, yeah. So this is called this particular thing is called by several different names. It the first scientist that discovered it called it the differential effect. Then I called it the mirror worlds effect because you have mirror worlds. And then another researcher came along and named it something entirely different. But it's all the same thing. It's this S-shaped curve there, and it allows researchers to use general populations. As long as you divide them up into skeptics and believers, you can get this curve. Not all of the time, but you can get it and you can get it enough.
That's so fascinating. And
yeah.
I wanted, oh yeah, sorry, go on. Do you have something?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask you, Craig, like if you want to talk about this, but did you ever have a spiritual experience yourself that really changed you? And I don't know, maybe you had experience with, what is it called? Psychedelics, or maybe you meditated and you had an experience that went out of the physical. What is something do you have any experience like that really changed your worldview?
So first of all, I've been like in tune psychically my entire life. This has never been anything unusual for me. It's just I've never had this point where I suddenly became this way. It's always been this way for me my entire life. So there are experiences that some people might go, oh, well, that's super psychic, and I'm like, what? Because it all feels very ordinary to me. And I've been married for 37 years, and with my wife, it's like I'll say, I just wanted to, and she'll answer it already. It's like, can you just wait till I finish the question? But she already knows. She knows exactly where I'm going with it, and she's answering it before that because she doesn't feel like waiting. And so you have this psychic ability built into our personalities, that she's impatient. So if she knows where I'm going with it before I even open my mouth, she'll answer. So that's ordinary. It's like we used to have the cats wander the neighborhood before we fenced them all in so that we don't have that anymore. But I would simply mentally call them home if we need, when we wanted them, and they would come. They'd take their time, but 20 minutes later, everybody starts showing up once I put out the call mentally. And I had one really big one. Just this like, oh wow, this was just like ridiculous. So, this story, it's about it's precognition, which was, somebody had asked me about a particular, thing. Like they were at the time they were having all this stuff going on in the Gulf of Mexico. Gulf of Mexico, by the way. With oil platforms drilling and leaks and that sort of thing. And as they were talking, I was wondering kind of whether they were going to go with this because it looked pretty serious. And out of the blue, I had this vision in my mind of this huge flame shooting up. I mean, this enormous fireball, flames everywhere, and panic, people getting hurt and all that kind of stuff. And I had no idea whether it was related to that or not, but I told people about it, and I wrote, it's like I see this huge fireball and whatnot. Well, a month later, a gas line about 10 miles north of me, 24-inch, so this is an enormous gas line, blew up, and an enormous fireball burst into the air and burned about 50 houses. Yeah. And there was like, oh, that's what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Precognition to me. Yeah. Go on.
so that was it's like, oh wow, I've never done that before. Uh, I wasn't surprised by it, but what was interesting was for the whole time when I was before this event actually occurred, I was having a little bit of post-traumatic stress over it because I was feeling all the stuff that people were feeling in there and the panic and the fear that resulted from this enormous fireball. And it took a while for that to die down.
Yeah, because, I just wanted to say about that precognition that you had, because honestly, that one obviously was very much in your face. It was to a degree where you couldn't ignore it or write it off, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But precognition, honestly, for people who are less tuned in, it happens to them all the time as well. But the way they pick it up is by emotions, very subconsciously. So, before something happens, you kind of just feel a shift in the energy, or you feel like you already feel kind of shit that day. And then, that thing happens. It's kind of like, I think everyone experiences this on a different degree of awareness. And then I like to look at precognition as well from a point of view of you create your own reality. So did you actually create it, or did you know that it was going to happen? And my answer is actually both. Both is true at the same time. You did create it and you also knew it's going to happen. And then when we look at the non-linearity of time, everything makes sense. I mean, if you know the movie Arrival.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was an interesting one.
Yeah, because, it looks at, memories from the future. That's kind of how I see it as well. And when I do inner child work and I go back to the past and basically help my inner child, it is directly affecting my inner child in that point of space and time. But yeah, with precognition, interestingly enough as well, a big one for me was before my grandfather died. And at the time he was actually very healthy, but it was like 6, 7, 8 months before he died. I had dreams, continuous dreams of him coming through as a spirit and telling me that he was going to pass soon. And this happened like 5 or 6 times. Dreams that were over a period of time and like months before. So he wasn't even sick at the time. And I just kind of felt it. And I knew that this was going to happen, that he was going to pass. I didn't tell anyone because I didn't want to make anyone feel distressed about it, right? But the reason why my grandfather did that specifically with me is I later found out, through meditation and tapping in and communicating with him after death, as well as because he knew this was my first grief, really grieving someone, that I loved that would pass. And so he wanted to prepare me. And so that was, that was beautiful as well. But again, if these things can feel scary if we live in a society that is very, very dogmatically materialist based. I have my personal vendetta against like the system that is like that, because
there's a study I think you'd find interesting. So this was done in the 1950s when people were still using commuter trains in the United States. The researcher's name was W.E. Cox. And the question he asked was, on the days when trains crashed, what was the ridership? Did it go down from normal levels or did it stay the same? And what he found out was interesting was on the days where there was a train crash, attendance dipped quite a bit. So there might be like half the number of people were taking the doomed trains on the day that they crashed. So somewhere at a subconscious level, people were, going, nope, not today. Don't feel like being in that crash on a subconscious level.
Something that me and my partner, we spend a lot of time together. Obviously, we live together and everything, and we love spending time together on our free days, right? So normally when we have a free day together, like let's say the weekend, we're both not working, we like to go somewhere together. But that day, there was a day, I think it was a Saturday, and I had a podcast in the evening that I was recording. So I was like, I cannot come with you right now because I have a podcast. I need to go home. And he was like, yeah, but I want to go shopping. Or I want to go, whatever. And I said to him jokingly, when you separate from me, something bad will happen.
Oh, no.
Oh no. Oh my God. Guys, be careful. Okay, be careful what you say. It was just a joke because I like to be this like needy girlfriend, needy whatever fiance, being like, if you're far away from me, something will literally train accident. But like it was fine. Nobody died because Japan is extremely safe. And like even if there is something issues with trains, I think honestly, the way that the train system works in Japan is beautiful, so accurate and very, very, a lot of autistic people, by the way, working in the train system in Japan. That basically, yeah, something happened where someone, a driver, I don't know if that's what it's called, but someone was still learning to drive the train and made a mistake, and it was a whole mess. And then we talked about that later. We were laughing about that. And I said to him, "I told you if you separate from me, something bad will happen." So honestly, guys, be careful what you say, because when we talk about these subconscious programs and creating your own reality, they often say your subconscious doesn't know that you're joking. Dr. Joseph Murphy, he used to talk about this, right? The jokes are not really like your subconscious doesn't know. Like if someone says, "Oh, you look beautiful," and you're as a woman, right, and you're like, "Oh, I'm ugly," it's not really funny for your body as much as it is seeming to your mind. But to connect to that, I wanted to ask you, after all of these things, all of these studies that you found out, and the things that you write about and talk about in parapsychology and creating your own reality, and spirituality in general, esoteric concepts, how do you apply this in your daily life? Do you apply this?
To a certain extent, yeah. Of course, this is, we're talking about psychic things of the mind, and I think the big thing for parapsychology for me was when I started really understanding that, yes, there was science about this. Yes, they had discovered some stuff, and yes, this was some serious stuff. This is real. This is the real stuff that, when I'd done the New Age movement back in the 1990s and 80s and stuff, because I'm just that old. And there was and they had a lot of bullshit involved. That a lot of egotistical people get into the mysticism because they could just make stuff up, and they act like they're big gurus and whatnot and all that sort of thing. I mean, this was rampant through there, and so I really didn't know what to believe. They were very untrustworthy as guides, and I could see that in them, and it basically drove me away from all of that. Not into skepticism, not into atheism, but that particular New Age stuff, the egoism and the lack of any scientific focus at all just drove me nuts. So when I got into parapsychology, finally people were doing it correctly. For example, scientists, instead of making these grand pronouncements, they would be very careful in what they said. It's like, this appears to be real based upon these particular things, and then they would provide evidence for all of that. And so you could go back and follow the evidence and see how they reached their conclusions and understand what they were doing and why this was a guarded response. And there was no hyperbole, because you don't do that in science. And so finally I started getting information that I could trust. And that's really what science will do for you, is you have information that you can actually trust, instead of like, oh, with the 5 lights of the golden thing or whatever, I heal you. Okay, whatever. Experiments don't say, well, when we test experiments will say, when we test remote viewing, this is the results we have. We had some major successes here. We did it 5 times, nothing happened, and that sort of thing. So they tell you everything. And so you get an idea, okay, this is what I actually experience, which is in and out. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not, and all that sort of stuff. And what this did for me personally was it made it more real. Because what the scientists were demonstrating in the experiments more closely matched the psychic ability that I knew. And in other words, so instead of instead of somebody going out there and acting like, oh, it's just easy, just imagine it, this all comes to you because that's what happened for me. It's no, this is difficult stuff. We have a lot of trouble with the experiments. They're not easy, and we need statistics to find out whether we actually did something. And that's a lot more what psychic ability is like most of the time for most people. Is you're not 100% sure. It's not easy. You're not really. There's ambiguity all over the place. And so this was important to me, and then it was easier for me to just be in it and not question it anymore. That was really the biggest thing, was to stop questioning it.
Interesting. This is why you are a scientist and I'm not, because I completely am out of that, having to prove anything, because I just don't have that scientific mind. I kind of, for me, my experience is true and real. And I just feel very grounded in that, specifically when I drop out of my head into my heart center and I channel information, also consciously. For me, it's just, I don't need that for other people to prove it, but I can see why. And this is where my next question kind of connects, is people like you are so necessary, though, in the field and in even like the mainstream, right, of what people think is real and what people think is science. And people don't understand that parapsychology is a real science, or that these experiences, right, that people, even paranormal experiences, psychic abilities, that these are provable. And, I had Laurie Williams on the podcast, actually. I don't know if you know her. She's a very famous remote viewer. She was...
Oh, yeah, I know who she is. I don't know her, but I know who she is.
Yeah. So she, obviously worked with the, these, military programs, and, they can quantify her stuff and really like prove that what she is channeling or what she is seeing is true and real. And I think it's really important that you have these people like you, like these scientists who really are like, okay, but what is the proof and how does it actually look like? So I really respect it, even though like for me, I'm like, la, 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 and I'm out here in the spiritual realm, and I'm like, but this is where my next question connects is, how do you think in the future this will look like? Because do you think that basically the spiritual phenomena, these parapsychological phenomena, are going to get more and more proven and more? Do you basically think that spirituality and science are going to more and more merge?
Yeah. Before I answer that, let me just say I'm not a scientist. I'm a science explainer. So I'm between the scientists and the general public. So I'm the person who looks at this stuff and says, okay, I know how to explain this to people. That's basically my part. So I have enough science, I have enough science intelligence to handle it, but I'm not a scientist. Anyway, so getting on to the question. So first of all, it's all going to go very slowly. Science does not progress quickly this way. Unless something comes right out of the blue and causes a major shift that I cannot foresee, what it looks like to me is a slow progression. So, and the first major hurdle will be getting through the field of psychology, where they begin to accept this as part of psychology, which they have to in order to progress. Psychology is like pretty much at a standstill at the moment, and they need parapsychology to begin advancing beyond where they're at, because materialism does not work as a fundamental theory for psychology. There's a limit to how much you can study the brain and learn about the mind. And the major problem with that is what they call the hard problem of consciousness, which is you can't look at the brain and know the thought that goes behind it and know what the thought is. So, for example, I can hold up a phone, right? And I can say, yep, it's a phone, but I can't give you my experience of a phone. And there is no part of I don't have a phone part of my brain. Maybe we'll develop one in the future, but at the moment, there's no phone spot in the brain. So the experience of a phone is not something that you can convey through electrochemical neuron activity. My experience of a phone is something that the brain cannot. The brain would have to translate into signals, but the signals aren't the thought.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah, do you follow that? It's a difficult jump there,
It's
but
difficult, yeah.
yeah, but the neural activity of the brain is not the thought. We don't know what the experience of a phone is for me, compared for me compared to somebody else, unless we tell you. You can't see it in the brain.
Yeah.
To give you something far more basic, there's no such thing as a red photon. There's no blue photon. There's no yellow photon. There's no violet photon. All we've done with the photon is change the wavelength, right? Same photon, different wavelength. So there is no such thing as red. There is no such thing as blue or yellow or violet. These things are all interpretations that the mind has created of different photon lengths.
Yes. I understand, yeah.
Okay, so that's the hard problem of consciousness, is how do you get from the length of a photon to red, the experience of red. And in psychology, the problem they're having is they've concentrated so much on the brain that they don't know how to make that jump, because that jump basically can't be made. You can't get from one to the other, and so things are kind of scattered. And the problem with that, one of the things that parapsychology picks up, is that the group consciousness, when you run a study, the whole group consciousness there affects the outcome of the study.
Yeah.
This is called the experimenter effect. So you'll have one person do a study and find out something with their group. Another person could do the same study, but they'll have different expectations and they'll get a different result. Third one comes in, they've got an entirely different set of expectations. And what do you know? They get their set. And so all these people are getting, and so they're looking at all these experiments that nobody could duplicate. And they don't know why. And the reason seems to be that there's an experimenter effect going on, that people are getting the results they want because their intention is out there, and it doesn't necessarily, that you can't generalize it.
Yes, it kind of ties to what we said earlier with you are the experiencer. You are the thing that translates reality. So how can you disconnect? You cannot disconnect from that, right? It kind of, to me, it connects there to what we said earlier.
Yeah, so you don't really have an easy objective reality to work towards. And when you're using a materialist theoretical underpinning, you get crap. Interesting, huh?
Yes. This is so, oh my God, this is so interesting, right? But so you're basically saying this is why we have some issues there in bringing these together, or do you think it's, yeah, so you think it's going to take a long, long time until, because I'm thinking the tools we have, even in science, are not actually made to measure consciousness or study consciousness in a way that I think is sufficient, right? Because we are so focused on the material world. So do you think it's the tools also that are not sufficient? Do you think it's time we need to think about a different way of proving, or?
Well, my experience with scientists is that they're always, they're pretty clever people, and that if they want to figure out how to test something, they'll figure it out eventually, some way. They'll come up with something novel to demonstrate something. But you need to be working from the correct theoretical underpinning. And if you're using the idea that consciousness is fundamental, then you could begin to design your experiments around that idea and then have more success. So, for example, parapsychology has, you're familiar with double blind? A double blind experiment is when neither the experimenter nor their subjects know what the results are until everything is completed. So, and they don't know. So the experimenters are blind to what the test subjects are doing until the experiment is completely finished. And the subjects are completely blind to what the experimenter is intending and all this kind of thing. So basically, everybody is compartmentalized, and nobody really sees the whole picture while the experiment is taking place. And that's a double blind because the experimenter and the test subject are both blinded to it. So, for example, on a telepathy experiment where you get four choices, the experimenter doesn't choose the choices. That's done automatically. And while the experiment is taking place, the experimenter doesn't know which one is the correct one because they didn't pick it. They don't know. It's all random, and they don't find out until much later what that was. So everybody's blinded to what everybody else is doing. That's called the double blind. And in parapsychology, they take that very seriously because of these other effects that they know are going on. So in parapsychology, it's 85% of experiments are double blind, and the ones that aren't double blind are that way because they don't need it.
Okay.
So they have 85% is way more than everybody else. The most other sciences do is around 30%. Yeah. So they tend to have really, really high quality experiments in parapsychology because they're dealing with a phenomena that can affect it in so many different ways that they have to be very careful about how the experiments are done.
Yeah, and also I can imagine that it's not taken seriously by the rest of science, so they feel even more driven to prove that it's like really high quality and, I guess, professional.
Yeah, there's that too. So when we're talking about the advancement of parapsychology, psychology is already starting to adopt some of the areas of parapsychology into psychology, and they need this was largely due to a paper that came out in 2017 that basically said, hey, here's the evidence for psychic ability, folks. And it was published in a major psychology journal. And ever since then, there's been this creep forward a little bit at a time. And now the Parapsychological Association has hosted continuing education classes for psychology for what they call exceptional experiences, because it's an area where nobody else in psychology has any experience. By exceptional experiences, this is like when people get poltergeist experiences and stuff like that, where the psychic experience is so far outside of their normal thinking that it just knocked them off kilter.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm really excited to see where that goes, and even people who do a lot of studies on psychedelics. Back in the day, there was this documentary about DMT, the something molecule, the conscious. What was it called? But that one was wonderful as well. The conscious molecule or the consciousness molecule? I'm not sure. But that one was wonderful too. And I think even people who do study and, experiment with the psychedelics as well, they find very interesting stuff about consciousness as well. Yeah, super fascinating.
You want to know an interesting thing about psychedelics?
Yes.
They're not turning a part of the brain on. They're turning it off.
Yes. I know that actually.
They're turning it off. That means that we have part of our brain that's actually that's actually putting the brakes on the psychic ability and the ability to experience all this oneness and whatnot. We are dampening this down. All of our effort is going into keeping that stuff away.
Exactly.
And and psychedelics they shut that part down, they quiet it down, and all of a sudden you can experience these things. So what does that tell you about reality, that they're shutting this, that psychedelics have to turn off parts of our brain in order for us to experience it?
Yes. I saw that about psilocybin, I think. And then they also proved and measured the brain of monks who meditated, and same thing as psilocybin. It was shutting down parts of the brain. And so, super fascinating. Super, super cool. How that works.
They've identified a part of the frontal left lobe where if they temporarily suppress it, people's psychic ability increases.
Interesting.
Yeah, isn't it?
Yes. I don't know if you're familiar with Bashar. I love Bashar's teachings. He's a spiritual channel, basically. He channels an extraterrestrial entity. Daryl Anka is the guy. And he channels an extraterrestrial entity from a different dimension that's connected to humanity. That's called Bashar. So Bashar is not just one being, but like many beings in and out. And very interesting stuff. But what he talks about is all the time is you're not just using 10% of your brain. You're using 100% of your brain to only use 10% of your brain. And that's like something that makes it also very visual to me. Like, oh yeah, we are actually, it takes effort to shut these parts, I guess, on to turn these things off. Or I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah. We're spending all of our energy. We're spending 100% of our energy to only take in 10%.
Yes, exactly. It's fascinating. It's so cool. I love that you said that as well about psychedelics. So at the end of my sessions, I do like a rapid fire round. So I want you to just answer very, very shortly.
Okay.
Without thinking too much. Okay. Do you think materialism is useful? Is it a useful tool, or is it an intellectual trap?
It is useful for ordinary, everyday things. And as soon as you get into the areas of the mind, it becomes a complete disaster.
I love that. Consciousness, local or non-local?
Non-local.
Skeptics, necessary or limiting?
Limiting.
What are paranormal experiences you wish that were studied more?
I wish we had more information on poltergeists. They're hard to study because they come and go so quickly. But I wish we had more information on them because the telekinesis is very strong.
Interesting. They're probably hiding. Do you think science needs more humility or courage?
Courage.
Maybe courage to be more, to have more humility.
I would say courage to follow up on the stuff that they know to be true.
Wonderful. What is love to you?
My wife.
Oh, that's beautiful. Oh my God. Thank you so much, Craig. I had a wonderful time. This was beautiful. Thank you so much for joining.
Jenna, this has been wonderful. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for interviewing me.
Thank you so much. I love your scientific way of thinking, and I'm just like airy-fairy all over the place. But I hope you still had a good time here, and I really, really appreciate it.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you so much. And thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. Please like, share, subscribe, comment. Okay, I read the comments. I love engaging with you guys. And subscribe if you want more conversations like these. And I will see you guys next week.